So without further ado, I'm going to now introduce our very first presenter, Mr. Jeffrey Horncastle. Now, Jeff has been 8 years of experience, has 8 years of experience with the Canadian Anti-FraudCentre, where he plays a leading role in fraud prevention and public outreach. For the past 4 years, Jeff has coordinated national awareness campaigns in collaboration with key stakeholders, including the RCMP, the OPP, Ontario Police Department, Competition Bureau of Canada. And as the Canadian Anti-FraudCentre spokesperson, Jeff is a trusted voice in educating Canadians on how to recognize, reject, and report fraud. He has led major initiatives such as Fraud Prevention Month, spearheaded media engagement strategies, and developed public safety messaging in collaboration with partners across Canada.
My name is Jeff Horncastle. Job title is Client and Communications Outreach Officer. So in other words, I coordinate fraud awareness and education for the Canadian Anti-FraudCentre, whether it be the spokesperson or, writing our material, engaging with partners. I do a bit of everything. So, and I will mention back when I first started, the first 3 years of my my career here with the center was spent on the phones. So dealing directly with victims, where I got a really good understanding of how fraud impacts Canadians on a daily basis, and more importantly, how it affects everyone differently. This morning, I'll tell you about the Canadian Anti-FraudCentre. I think it's important to understand what the mandate of the CAFC is, what we do with the information, why you should report, right? I think a lot of Canadians have a misunderstanding of what we do with the information and why you should be reporting. We'll touch on some fraud stats, so show you the impact that fraud has on Canadians, specifically in 2024, where we'll touch on top reported frauds, how they work, what to watch for, and most importantly, how to protect yourself. The impact of fraud, how fraud impacts Canadians in different ways, and most importantly, how to go about reporting to the Canadian Anti-FraudCentre. The CAFC is a national police service that gathers intelligence related to fraud across Canada and assists police of jurisdiction or local police with enforcement and prevention efforts. So we help citizens and businesses report fraud, learn about different types of fraud, recognize the warning signs of fraud, protect themselves from fraud. We also provide information to law enforcement and governments in Canada and around the world. So which our goals include disrupting crime, strengthening the partnership between the private and public sectors, which in turn maintains Canada's economy. I will mention that the CAFC is jointly managed by, like Ruth mentioned, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, or the RCMP, the Competition Bureau of Canada, and the Ontario Provincial Police. The Canadian Anti-FraudCentre accepts reports from Canadians. We share that information to protect them. So if you're reporting something new, we have the ability to share the messaging throughout our channels, throughout the country with our partners, to educate and spread awareness based on the current reporting we're getting. And on top of that, we support investigations not only in Canada, but internationally as well, with partners like Interpol and Europol. So although we don't investigate directly, we can link information together from victims in Montreal, victims in Toronto, victims in Vancouver, Halifax. We have the ability to link suspect information together and share that information with law enforcement agencies in Canada and across the world. So moving on to stats, top 10 frauds based on number of reports in 2024. So we can see that identity fraud is by quite a bit the top reported fraud based on number of reports of the Canadian Anti-FraudCentre, followed by service fraud. So that could be, in Quebec, I know that that heat pump frauds are prominent, door-to-door scams where they might offer you to install a new heat pump, right? You have to sign a contract immediately, or you'll miss out on the promotional opportunity if you don't do it right away. Merchandise fraud, so that's anything from ads on social media or something you're looking for online where you do a Google search and you click on the first ad that you see. That's search engine optimization, which we'll touch on as well. Investment fraud we'll touch on, and extortion close out the top 5. And we see the massive impact that investment fraud has on Canadians, or had on Canadians in 2024. So by a mile, 313 million was lost in investment fraud, followed by spear phishing, which is typically a type of fraud that affects businesses. Romance has been in our top 2 or 3 for many years, which we'll touch on as well. Job scams have skyrocketed when we're looking at dollar loss. They've almost quadrupled since 2022, largely due to a lot of Canadians looking to find opportunities for freelance opportunities to work from home, to make ends meet, right? So and extortion has been a prominent type of fraud as well for many years. We know that fraud affects everybody, where we see it increase on a yearly basis for all demographics, whether we're looking at males, females, age groups. Fraud affects everyone. But with that being said, when we look at 60 and above, we can see that the overall reported dollar loss is substantially higher than other age groups. So there are many factors that come into play. It has nothing to do with seniors not knowing as much, or not, it's nothing like that. One of the main reasons here is that fraudsters play on victims' emotions. So they try to capitalize on that trust that seniors may have more than other age groups, or they may not have been informed about a new type of technology, right? Because they're busy doing other things. So those are just a couple of examples. Fraudsters may be targeting home phones, where that senior demographic still has that home phone when compared to other demographics that don't. They only carry a cell phone, right? So those are a few prominent examples where certain types of fraud target home phones, like the emergency grandparent scam, for example. Now we're seeing it target cell phones as well. But all this to say is that at the end of the day, fraud affects everyone. But what we want to touch on here today is which frauds are affecting seniors. And to put it into perspective, we estimate that only 5 to 10% of victims report to the Canadian Anti-FraudCentre. So in 2024, for example, overall reported loss was 647 million. When we put that into perspective, and we say that only 5 to 10% of fraud is reported, in reality, losses to fraud in Canada are into the billions. So it's a very big problem, and even more important for us to get together and do sessions like we are today here. A lot of us think that, you know what, I'll never fall into an investment fraud, but it happens very quickly. It's a fraud that can last quite a long time. Different things come into play, right? So you might be on social media, you might get a message from somebody you think is your friend, somebody you have in your contact list on Facebook, and they say, hey, I got, I made a bunch of money last month on this crypto investment website. You should try it out, right? You say, okay, why not? You go to the website, it looks very legitimate. You decide to put $100 in. You say, you know what, if I put $100 in, if it's it's not a big risk, right? So you put $100 in and you see your money grow. And in a lot of cases, you're able to withdraw the initial investment that you put in. So you might be able to withdraw $300. So you made 200% or 300% on your initial investment, right? So that the fact that you're able to withdraw the amount that you put in, that initial investment, convinces you that the website is legitimate, and then you decide to put a bit more money in and a bit more money in, and you're the website's really sophisticated. They're using AI technology now that makes it very believable. But unfortunately, as time goes on, victims put in thousands, sometimes into hundreds of thousands, or even, we've had reports where victims have lost millions into crypto investment. When it comes time to withdraw that total amount, that's where you realize that you've been scammed. Now that's just one example. Another example might be the fact that you're interested in crypto investments, and you pull up your Google search and you type in crypto investments. There's a good chance that the first 5 to 10 results are going to be fraudulent websites. All this to say is that it's so important to do your research when we're discussing investment fraud. Reach out to your Securities Commission in Quebec, l'Autorité des marchés financiers in French. They have a lot of good information. Excellent resource to consult. We have to remember that a lot of fraudulent companies will copy real names of investment companies. So keep that in mind when doing your research, and reach out to the Canadian Anti-FraudCentre if you have to. Discuss it with a friend, a family member. The more you discuss it, the more you talk about it, the less chance you'll have of being victimized. So relationship and romance fraud. So we've kind of edited the title, the name of the fraud, because we're seeing a lot of cases where victims may not be in a romantic relationship with the person they're communicating with, but just kind of communicating with the person, and then they're offered that opportunity to invest into cryptocurrency. So they may have been, communicating with the person, a friendship on social media, or a random text message that they got, and it turns into crypto investment. So that's why we refer to that as relationship and investment fraud, or relationship and romance fraud. So digging into romance fraud, it's a different type of fraud that plays on victims' emotions to steal money and or personal information. It often starts on social media. So you might get a random friend request, or on a dating site where you're looking for companionship, right? To meet somebody online. What's important is to recognize the signs from the beginning. If someone expresses their love for you right away, very quickly, they always have excuses of why they can't meet you in person. And most importantly, down the line, they ask you for money. So our number one rule with romance scams is to never send money to somebody you've never met. There's nothing wrong with trying to meet somebody online, but it's just so important to recognize the signs of romance scams, right? So sometimes, unfortunately, fraudsters will wait months or years before asking for money. They're manipulative. A lot of it is organized crime, and they know that the more of an emotional connection they have with the victim, the more they can potentially steal from that victim, because they can manipulate them a lot more. So just remember to never send money to somebody you've never met, and this way you'll protect yourself from being a victim to a romance scam. Bank investigator, I think that my colleague here, Andrew from the CBA, will probably get into this quite a bit. He has a lot of knowledge on the bank investigator fraud. Basically, an automated phone call, or a phone call claiming that there are a couple of fraudulent transactions on your bank account, credit card, or even claiming to be Amazon in some cases. They ask you to dial 1 or number 2 if you weren't responsible for the transactions. In some cases, what we're seeing based on our reporting is that fraudsters have some of the victim's personal information when they call. So to make it more believable, right? So you not realizing that you've been part of a breach in the past, fraudsters have that information available on the dark web, for example. They can utilize that information as a tool to try to fraud you. So they might have some of your debit card information, your credit card information, some of your personal information like your name, your date of birth. All this to say is that no matter what information the caller has on you, or they know what bank you deal with, there's no way to confirm who is on the other end of the line when you're receiving a phone call. So we always advise that, as legitimate as the phone call seems, always let the caller know you're going to call them back, and make the outgoing phone call to your bank, whether it's the National Bank or Desjardins or whatever the case may be. If it's something serious, go into the branch and discuss it with them directly and physically, and that way there you'll protect yourself from being a victim. So many different variations with the bank investigator scam. Like I mentioned, we've had cases where fraudsters are actually showing up to the victim's door to pick up the victim's debit card in an envelope. It sounds in some cases far-fetched, but it's not. These fraudsters are very manipulative. They have a way of convincing victims. Like I mentioned, they may utilize some of your personal information. They implant fear in a lot of types of fraud, not only with the bank investigators. So unfortunately, victims act in a way that they wouldn't normally act, right? Because they're scared in that moment, right? So always important to take a step back and talk to a family member, talk to a friend, talk to the Canadian Anti-FraudCentre, or maybe even your local police, right? And like I mentioned, if they're claiming to be your financial institution, get in the car, drive down, go into the bank physically, or make the outgoing phone call to the number on the back of your card. Identity theft and identity fraud. So I touched on this a little bit, where you may have been part of a breach in the past. That's considered identity theft, where your personal information was compromised. You may have provided your personal information in a phishing message a couple of years ago that you don't remember, that you're still considered a victim of identity theft. So this is any instance where your personal information may have been lost or compromised. So you maybe lost an important tax paper with your social insurance number on it. you're still a victim of identity theft because that paper could have fallen into the hands of the wrong person, right? You may have provided remote access to a fraudster at some point with, through a Microsoft scam or a tech support scam. So these are all examples of where you may have been a victim of identity theft. And the goal is to prevent your identity, prevent yourself from being a victim of identity fraud. So identity fraud is when your personal information is used to apply for credit cards, open cell phone accounts, open bank accounts. Through COVID, we saw criminals applying for CERB benefits or EI, right? So these are all examples of identity fraud. And you want to make sure that the minute you realize you're a victim of identity theft, that you're protecting your identity from being a victim of identity fraud. Unfortunately, I don't have enough time to go through all the steps, but they're all listed on our website at antifraudcentre.ca. And if you click on the tab that's labeled what to do if you're a victim, all the steps are outlined there. So, in the case where you've been part of a breach in the past, go double check those steps, make sure you've done everything you need, because being a victim of identity fraud can be a very big headache. And if you take the steps to protect yourself, you'll save yourself from that huge headache. Phishing, I think we probably all get maybe at least one message per day, either by text message or by email. They basically direct you to click on a link or to download an attachment. Their goal with this is to capture or to steal your personal information. 5,850 reports, in 2024, very small fraction of what's actually out there. If we consider that we're all getting like one or two messages per day, phishing is huge. Technology is being used, AI, right? It could be used in ways that we're not aware of. I know I haven't touched on AI much, but if we think of AI, I think and fraud, we automatically think of deepfake videos, right? So fake videos that we might see on social media of a politician or an actor promoting type of merchandise or promoting crypto investments like I mentioned earlier. But we have to recognize that artificial intelligence is used in a lot of ways that we don't necessarily see and that we don't necessarily know based on reporting that we're getting from Canadians. So an example of that is phishing. Phishing messages might be a little more personalized than they have in the past. And the reason for that is because artificial intelligence technology can analyze a bunch of data and personalize that message before it's sent to the victim. So that's one example of how technology is playing into fraud. And at the end of the day, it doesn't change the fact that you should avoid clicking on links on incoming emails or text messages before you verify the sender's information or make outgoing communication. So we'll move on to showing you a few examples of phishing here. So this is actually an example of phishing claiming to be the victim's financial institution. So it might say, RBC or whatever, unusual activities detected. What they do with this type of fraud is they'll include the first 4 to 6 digits of your client card number. Now, not realizing, or most people don't realize, that all client card numbers, or most client card numbers with specific financial institutions, all start with the same 4 to 6 numbers, which are referred to as a business identification number. So this is just an example of how fraudsters change their ways to try to manipulate victims with a mass message sent out. Now they know that a lot of the people that they're sending this message to may not deal with that specific financial institution, but they also know that a lot of them do, right? So even if there's 10 or 20, that's more victims. They victimize more people than they started the day with, unfortunately. And they're able to automate messages and send these messages to different combinations of phone numbers. They have no idea who they're sending them to. They're just hoping that anyone clicks on the link and provides the personal information so they can take that information and apply for credit cards. And at the end of the day, they're after money, right? So that's one example to watch out for. We're still seeing reporting on that. So next slide. CRA notice, I think it's been around for many years. It might say that you're entitled to a payment, a GST, HST payment. I think fraudsters know that we're all looking for a bit of extra money, and we might, for a split second say, oh, you know what, I don't think I got my GST last month. So you click on the link, provide your personal information, and in most cases you realize right after you've done that you've done something wrong, right? So again, it's just a matter of taking a step back and looking and realizing, okay, you take 5 minutes or whatever, or speak to a family member, a friend. It'll save you from being a victim, because you'll remind yourself the CRA doesn't send payments by text message, right? It's always by direct deposit, and if you don't have that set up, you'll get a good old-fashioned check in the mail. Now, this is an example of fraudsters trying to use unfortunate situations. So the FRF, you currently meet the FRF, so that's a Fiona Relief Fund. So they're trying to capitalize on wildfires when they can. The Hurricane Fiona, we saw a lot of messages come in related to that. So they're targeting obviously population on the East Coast, but when there are fires in Quebec, we also saw a lot of text messages related to that as well. So just to say is that, once there's a big event like COVID or whatever the case may be, fraudsters always tend to try to capitalize on these unfortunate events and try to steal your personal information. So impact of fraud. I touch on the impact of fraud and how fraud can affect everyone differently. From a victim of identity fraud, it may not bother me, right? I might just say, make a phone call, whatever. I wouldn't get too stressed about it. But on the other hand, it can affect the person, that lives my neighbor much differently, right? If they're spending their half their days on the phone and they're having to miss work, it can take a toll on a person. There's a lot of stigma around being a victim of fraud, and we're trying to get away from that. How often do we hear the phrase, that's just a scam, right? Not thinking, let's say, for example, I heard that and I was victimized by a scam yesterday. I hear somebody say that, I'm not going to be very motivated to discuss what happened. I'm not going to be very motivated to report because I'm ashamed. I'm embarrassed. I feel stupid, right? Because that person, without knowing it, was downplaying like I'm supposed to know, right? So if I was victimized, I definitely, I'm not going to report it or discuss it with anybody. So that attitude plays into the stigma around fraud, and that's what we're trying to get around. So we have to remember that the fraud isn't just about the financial loss. We broke down the stats. The reason we do that is to illustrate the impact that the fraud has on Canadians. With that being said, you can't put a number on the emotional distress it puts on Canadians, psychological effects. It can lead to social isolation, in some cases, loss of trust in the system, right? If nobody's there to help. So you can report to the Canadian Anti-FraudCentre, which we'll see on the next slide. And most importantly, if you have been a victim, it's so important to contact your local police. They have the ability to investigate directly, but so important to contact the CAFC as well. For the reasons that I mentioned earlier, we have the ability to link information together and support investigations, because in most cases, fraud is perpetrated by organized crime. And it's important that we have that information. What you could be sharing could be the missing piece of the puzzle, for example. And we also have the ability to share fraud awareness messaging, current fraud awareness messaging with our partners across the country. So, if you have been a victim, local police, financial institution, all the steps are on our website. If you've been a target of fraud, you can report to the Canadian Anti-FraudCentre as well. Our phone number is 1-888-495-8501. Or you can report online, www.antifraudcentre.ca. You click on report fraud. It'll ask you to register for a GC key. I think a lot of people get discouraged when they see that. All it is, creating a username and a password. Once you've done that, you'll be able to log in with that information and file a report, upload attachments, and tell us what happened.
The first question that we have for you is, do you feel that laws against individuals who commit fraud are strict enough? Can you tell us about that?
That's a great question. It's not really something that I can get into. Speaking on behalf of the Canadian Anti-Fraud Center, I think it's important that we stick to our mandate and which is, for the most part, spreading awareness and giving Canadians the tools to getting to that point to begin with, right? So, fraud awareness education is one of the top tools to protect ourselves from fraud. And that's what we focus on. Unfortunately, like we have nothing to do with the laws, but we can prevent ourselves from getting to that point.
Thank you. The next question is from Lorraine, who was a victim of fraud, reported it many years ago, never heard back. She asks, how long should she keep her documents concerning the fraud?
That's a great question, Lorraine. So I hope that you report it to your local police as well. But with the Canadian Anti-Fraud Center, in a lot of cases, you won't hear back, and that's just because we don't directly investigate. Not to say that your information may not have been used to support an investigation. So, like I mentioned, every report matters. I'm really sorry to hear that you were victimized. You can hold on to your documents. We would advise to put them away if they may be of use in the future. There's no set time on how long you can keep the documents, but yeah, hopefully that answers your question.
Thank you, Jeff. Susan asks, she's paying the National Bank every month to have Securizone to protect her from any different types of fraud. Is this company really protecting consumers?
Unfortunately, I can't speak on behalf of what their program or what service they're offering. I know that various financial institutions offer this type of service, so I think it's important to discuss that with your financial institution and weigh out the options. Our advice is to keep an eye on your credit report. You're entitled to one free report per year from Equifax and TransUnion, so you can give them a call. Ask them to mail you a credit report. It's important to do both Equifax and TransUnion because some financial institutions deal with Equifax, whereas others deal with TransUnion. What you'll want to do is go through the report and highlight all the accounts that belong to you, all the credit inquiries, and make sure that everything is actually activity that you're responsible for.
And do you feel that Canadian banks are doing enough to prevent fraud for their clients?
Fraud awareness education is a collective effort. We're doing as much as we can in our power. Not that we want to put a responsibility on Canadians, but it's so important that if you feel that you're equipped with some of the tools, some fraud awareness messaging, share that with your friends and family members that you think may be a little more vulnerable than you. It can go such a long way. We can't do it alone. Although we get the information and we have a responsibility to share that with Canadians. Sharing the information with one or two people, or posting something on Facebook, for example, or that stuff can go a long way. They say that a chain of tell two can reach millions and very quickly.
A question about why home phones are easier to target than cellular phones.
It's not that they're easier to target, because we see now that a lot of phone calls are automated and done with automated dialers, right? So it's not necessarily a fact that they're easier to target. And, by any means, I didn't want to discourage anyone from having a home phone. It's a fact in a lot of cases, although we don't have a phone book anymore, anybody that has a phone, a landline, may be listed on 411.ca, for example, right? So your name and your address and your phone number may be available to fraudsters, so they may have that personal information before calling you. And fraudsters, from what we're seeing, are still referring to those online databases. So just something to keep in mind, just knowing that. And like I mentioned, if they have some of your personal information before calling you, it does not mean the phone call is legitimate.